Today on Straight Talk Africa, an in-depth discussion on African elections. Are Africa's democracies moving forward? VOA journalists talk about the most important issues. That's next, right here on Straight Talk Africa.
Hello, welcome to Straight Talk Africa, live from the Voice of America in Washington, D.C. I'm Peter Clottey. Today we are talking about the recent elections in Africa. I'm joined here by Mwamunyu Hamza, Chief of VOA Swahili Division, and Edward Rema, VOA Central Africa Correspondent. Gentlemen, welcome to Straight Talk Africa.
Thank you so much, Peter.
Right, Hamza, let me come to you. Tanzania recently had an election. Some people said it was free, fair, and credible. You covered it intimately well. What were your assessments?
Nearly 2 years ago, because President John Pombe Magufuli, in a month's time, he'll be completing 2 years in power, elected in October 2015. So he's 2 years in his administration, not even halfway, because the term is 5 years. Right now it's about measuring what he's doing right, what he's doing wrong. The talk about the actual election really has kind of faded, but it also comes up when people are assessing the way he's dealing with the political space, freedom and social justice. How is it going to impact the next election in 2020? And there are some, holes there that that's where a lot of criticism are against President Magufuli.
So some of the opposition parties are saying his governance strategy appeared not to be working very well.
Well, it's a toss-up. I mean, there are those who think he's making great successes in terms of fighting corruption, in terms of making the government work, in terms of streamlining the largesse of the government expenditure. But when it comes to political space, that's where a lot of criticisms are due, because he has undermined a lot of political movement. He's not allowing opposition parties to operate freely. He's not allowing them to hold rallies. The opposition members, once and again, they're
isn't that against the Constitution by undermining the freedom of expression, assembly, among other issues, as enshrined in the Tanzanian Constitution?
Actually, it is. It is. But he's using the power of being in power.
The bully pulpit.
The bull pulpit, and he's using that. And I think my observation as a reporter covering Tanzania, I think the problem also lies with the opposition. They are not pushing back as much as they should. They are being undermined. They are being harassed. Of course, when the government has power, it has power. They can, take you and make you disappear, for an unknown number of months. If we will ever come back.
Right.
Yeah, but still, I think, especially for Tanzania, and this is what I always kind of try to put in arguments. Tanzania is a Nyerere country.
Right.
In a Nyerere country, the way Julius Nyerere founded the country and the way Julius Nyerere ran Tanzania, you wouldn't expect to see the opposition being cowed, to see democracy and social justice being undermined, because that's not the way Julius Nyerere operated.
Let me come to you, Eddie. You recently covered the Rwanda election where incumbent President Paul Kagame was declared the winner with, is it 98.63% of the vote?
That's right.
An overwhelming majority.
He was.
What was your experience?
Well, considering what happened in Tanzania, like my colleague Hamza has been saying, and what happened in Kenya, I believe we're going to be talking about what happened in Kenya. Rwanda's election wasn't as contested as the elections in Tanzania.
What was the problem?
Or Kenya.
Why?
I would say that, first of all, 8 of the 11 registered opposition parties sided with the president, with the ruling party, which is the Rwanda Patriotic Front. The only party that didn't side with them was the Green Party of Rwanda, which had a candidate running as against Paul Kagame. The other two didn't endorse any candidate. So, and when you look at the opposition itself, Frank Habineza, however much he tries to come forward, speak out against some of the issues that are happening in the country, try to challenge the ruling government, he's not so powerful enough to challenge a man like Kagame, who
but some people are saying
for 17 years.
That they did not give the opposition ample time to campaign effectively. They had less than a month to campaign.
They only had 20 days.
Right, well, yeah, President Paul Kagame is constantly campaigning, they said, so it's like it wasn't on a level playing field.
That's one of the issues that was raised by the opposition candidates, including Frank Habineza of the Green Party. He gave an example. For example, he said, you're giving us 20 days to campaign, yet the country itself has 30 districts. At least give us a day for every single district. And they were running against somebody who has resources, who has money and everything. These people didn't have any money. So even being able to move from one location to another was a challenge to most of them. When you look at the independent candidate, Philippe Mpayimana, this is a gentleman who lived in France. He was not known to anybody. He just came and decided to run. And he didn't have resources at all. The rest of the other candidates or the other political parties that people thought probably would, come up with a challenge to Kagame, decided to back Kagame. So in Rwanda, it was the results were predictable. So, and some of the people were even saying that why even hold an election where the results are predictable. But I actually posed that question to the executive secretary of the National Electoral Commission, who said that yes, well, Kagame might win with a resounding victory, but this is a process we are trying to build. So however much he wins with, we still needed to conduct this.
But how was the reaction from the ground?
Let me say this. I mean, when you examine democracy in Africa, in many countries in Africa, you have to look, how is democracy measured in Africa? The most effective way it is being measured is through elections.
Right.
And political, expediency and all that. And you take a look at the history of how multipartyism came to Africa. For a long time, many countries in Africa, they had one party. And so there was a lot of, cry about, having multipartyism, which would bring democracy and multi-party elections and all that. So finally, the powers that be said, okay, we'll bring in multipartyism. So we had a lot of countries had multi-parties.
And now they're associating it with violence.
But then, yes, but then the powers that be, I think they found a formula of how they can work the power of incumbency work for them by using the Electoral Commission. Right now, in many countries in Africa, you look at the independence of the Electoral Commission, it's lacking. And that's where the problem lies. So you may have what looks like a multi-party election. All opposition parties and the ruling party are competing, but there is some kind of other parties are being squeezed. They're not given enough time. They're not given airtime. There's no separation of where the government is operating and when the ruling party is operating, because you have government ministers of the government in power who go on campaign
using government
resources. Using government resources. So for instance, let's say just the recent elections in Kenya. I'm not saying this happened, but I think it did. Kenyatta goes on a campaign rally, and he takes questions from the people, and then he calls up the Minister of Health, come and answer that question.
Right.
The Minister of Health comes and says how well the government has done in terms of health, but then the question becomes, the Minister of Health is there on what capacity? Who is paying for him?
Strike the balance between the
Who is
politicians
paying
and the
for him to be there? Is the government paying for him or the party paying for him? Who is working for there at the campaign rally?
But aren't these supposed to be streamlined in the Constitution so there is no breach? The gray areas are strictly, probably eliminated to ensure a black and white rule, else the ruling government or the ruling party will continue to rule because the opposition usually doesn't have money. But in West Africa, for example, you had Professor Attairu Jiga in Nigeria being the chairman of the Electoral Commission. There was a spirited performance by Muhammadu Buhari in the opposition. He defeated Goodluck Jonathan. You go to Ghana, the New Patriotic Party led by Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo defeated incumbent President John Dramani Mahama. You go to Senegal, a similar thing happened. Why isn't this being replicated in parts of the continent?
I think part of the problem is, as we say, is democracy in action, and all these institutional parts that haven't been put in place. That's what, and it makes it easy for the incumbent to, maneuver with the system. And as long as that happens, it's not built in the Constitution. It's not built in campaign finance reforms. It's not built in who is paying for a campaign. There's a lot of money that comes on. I mean, as Eddie just said, in Rwanda, how can you compete with Paul Kagame, who's using government funds, and you are an independent or even an opposition party candidate, but where are you getting your money?
But how strong or how independent are these electoral bodies to administer these supposed credible, free, fair, transparent elections? Because usually these international poll observers will say the elections were free, fair, and transparent. However, the ruling parties are so strong that they lean on these electoral commission officials and they pretty much yield to their whims and caprices.
I think, like you said, the trend in West Africa is promising. They have been able to build institutions, and most of the institutions are becoming more independent. Whereas in other parts of Africa, you find electoral commissions being used as a tool to further the interests of the incumbents. So that becomes a problem. Unless we differentiate that and put in place electoral commissions, empower them, make them independent, put there people who are capable of running the real business of elections. Otherwise, we're going to keep having the same problems. Right now in Kenya, they're in courts because the opposition is saying probably,
Yes, challenge the results.
Yeah, the ruling party or the incumbent might have, done this and this and this and this to his favor. Which is something that in West Africa they're trying to overcome. You look at Ghana, like you said, Nigeria. Look at even in where Yaya Jammeh, Gambia. The Gambia. We had a ruthless dictator there, but the Electoral Commission was able to conduct an election that was free and fair, that actually...
Let us not forget that the ruling party or the president appears to choose who heads the Electoral Commission.
Absolutely.
And the government of the day funds the Electoral Commission. So how truly independent are they?
And that's where the problem, comes, because with all those aspects, being put in play, you really, as you say, you wonder whether this Electoral Commission is truly independent. In Kenya, for instance, they went through a very rigorous, process to get the Electoral Commission, the current one. The earlier one was dissolved. They created this one. All the commissioners, they had to go through the parliament. But still, there is some kind of semblance that, the government, had some power over this, the IEBC. Now, that's, hard to prove, but that's in a presumed, assumption that exists over this Electoral Commission. And that's the problem that happens in many African countries.
Now we'll pause for a short break. We want to remind you that Straight Talk Africa is now streaming on Facebook. Just enter the keywords Straight Talk Africa and watch our show live. And don't forget to share it with your friends. Also, we are on Twitter and we are tweeting live. Follow us at VOA Shaka. That's VOA Shaka, and join in on today's discussion with your questions and comments. Don't forget to use the hashtag VOA Africa Elections. We'll put some of your tweets on air later in the show. We'll be right back.
We are able to touch on things that are important to people on an everyday basis. We hope that our viewers are getting inspired when they watch our show. They're getting a view of the world from a different perspective, things that perhaps are not in their immediate vicinity. Today, I could put in on the show something that is a little different, a little unique, and this gives me that inspiration to come to work.
Like Voice of America on Facebook. Follow VOA on Twitter. Join VOA on our YouTube channel. Like, follow, join VOA.
Welcome back. Before we went for the break, Hamza, you were talking about the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission in Kenya, how they organized the recent election where incumbent President Uhuru Kenyatta was declared winner of the vote. Of course, former Prime Minister Raila Odinga is displeased, is challenging in court. What made him change his mind? He said he wasn't going to the Supreme Court. What happened?
Yeah, at the beginning, soon after the results were announced, Raila Odinga said he's not going to court. He'll find he has some other options. But I think given Kenya's history, and there was always, over these elections, there was always this concern that, there could be violence as it happened in 2007. I think he sat down with his advisors and they figured it out. The best way, the most peaceful way to do this, to resolve this, is to go to court. And they did that, which stopped the inauguration of President Kenyatta, which was supposed to be on August 29th, so it was postponed. So the case is in court right now. The Supreme Court has heard all the submissions. The judges are in deliberations as beginning today, and they will come up with their decision by Friday. Friday is the last day that they have to do this.
There was a Tanzania connection with the Kenya election where former Prime Minister and main opposition leader Edward Lowassa went ahead and campaigned for Uhuru Kenyatta. What happened?
Actually, when I was in Kigali,
right.
I was told that, well, this is from a source who is not official.
Yeah.
20 African presidents came for Kagame's inauguration.
Right.
The notable presidents that missed was Pierre Nkurunziza of Burundi and John Pombe Magufuli of Tanzania. And this source told me that the reason why we don't see John Pombe Magufuli here is because of Uhuru Kenyatta's presence.
Well, here's what happened. At some point, before Edward Lowassa appeared in Kenya campaigning for Uhuru Kenyatta, there were some news reports that the president of Tanzania, John Pombe Magufuli, was campaigning or was endorsing Raila Odinga.
Yes. But they are friends.
But they are friends. They are personal friends. Of course, the Tanzanian government disputed that. They denied that. But however, a few weeks later, Edward Lowassa appeared at a campaign rally for Uhuru Kenyatta. But a lot of people don't understand this. Lowassa is a Maasai, and he's a Maasai elder.
Right.
And Maasais are spread across Tanzania and Kenya. Anytime there is anything major happening in a Maasai community, you'll find Maasai leaders from Kenya going to the Maasai community in Tanzania, or the Maasai leaders in Tanzania going to Kenya for the Maasai community. So I think the angle here was Lowassa was trying to get the Maasai Kenya blocking vote, that block, to vote for Kenyatta. And it may have worked. A lot of observers think he picked up significant numbers because of Lowasa's visit from the Maasais.
But I think this is something that is a little common in Africa. I remember when Kagame was accepting his nomination, there were delegations from different ruling parties in Africa. CCM was represented, the National Resistance Movement of Uganda was represented. Jubilee Party also had representation at the nomination day. So I believe, well, since Kenya and Tanzania, I mean, are the big powers in East Africa. So when one opposition leader goes to support the incumbent of another country, that becomes an issue. But I think it's something that is common. We've seen.
Well, it may be common, but is it right? You know,
they're using the ethnic card.
Yeah,
that's the problem. That's the problem.
Yeah, political analysts, you know, think it's not right for you to go into interfere with another country's, you know, electoral process,
which is happening here in America.
Eddie, let me ask you this: talking about the political space or the political party space in Rwanda, what happened to Diane Rwigara? She came out saying she was going to challenge President Paul Kagame as an independent candidate. She was the only female presidential candidate at that time. She was disqualified by the
National Electoral
Commission. Under what circumstances? Because Philip Mpaimana, I understand nobody knew, you know, him. This lady was catching fire. Even Frank Habineza at one point said she was trying to have Miss Rwigara to join him to challenge President Paul Kagame. What happened?
Well, the information we got from the National Electoral Commission was that she didn't meet the threshold of the National Electoral Commission. So as an independent candidate in Rwanda, you're required to have at least 600 signatures from all the 30 districts. And from each district, you need to have at least 17. So the National Electoral Commission said she didn't meet the requirements as set by the National Electoral Commission law, and that was the reason why she was disqualified. But for her, when she spoke to reporters and the media, she said she had all the numbers. She had actually exceeded the numbers required.
She said she had twice when I spoke
twice
with her,
the number.
And she said that it was because some people do not want her to run, and that it could be dangerous for them if she is allowed to run. Was that the feeling you got on the ground?
Well, that's some of the feelings you get from people who are close to her. If you remember, her father was died in a sudden death 3 years ago. The family has accused the government of taking part in killing his father. And if you may know, right now, the family has reported that herself and 4 of her family members are missing. We spoke to police today. Police said they don't have her, but they confirmed that they went to her home to search her because of preliminary investigations that are going on. One, that she's being charged of electoral fraud, and the other thing is that
tax evasion.
Tax evasion.
By electoral fraud, how? She did not, you know, participate in the election. She was disqualified.
They say that some of the signatures she had were of people who died a year ago. So,
all right. Okay.
So that's what the government, I mean, the Electoral Commission said, and now I believe police has started investigations into that. The other thing is, you might remember that she's not the first woman who has actually tried to run for office. The other woman who tried was Victoria Ingabire.
Right.
She tried to run in 2010. She's now also in prison serving 15 years in jail.
Because the government accused her of being a genocide denier, genocider?
Yes, that's right. That's right.
Well, let me come to you. Looking at the elections in Kenya, the Raila Odinga's folks are saying that the Electoral Commission came up with some strategy to ensure that Uhuru Kenyatta wins. And they said even the printing of the ballot papers itself was questionable because it has links to Uhuru Kenyatta's family, sibling, and all that. Electoral Commission officials that I spoke with, the IEBC, dismissed all these allegations. What did you hear about some of these allegations?
Well, the allegations, as you said, they existed even before the elections. The NASA, the Raila Odinga coalition, went to court several times trying to stop the publication of the ballot papers. They lost that. They went to court a second time for another issue. I think they won some cases in court and they lost some. But when it came to the administration of the voting itself, the voting, a lot of people think, and the observers have said this, the voting went very well. And as you could see, there were long lines, there were no incidents in the actual voting. But NASA's main issue is that they allege, and this is the case that they have brought to court, that the IEBC computers were hacked in such a way that the numbers that came from the polling stations, they were transferred by online, are not the ones that the IEBC released as the results. So somewhere in between here lies the truth, and that's what NASA is trying to find out.
But when you have both local and international poll observers saying the elections were free, fair, and credible, doesn't that undercut the argument?
NASA doesn't argue with that. It doesn't argue with the fact that the elections were free, fair, They don't argue with that. The actual election process, they don't argue with that. What they're arguing with is what happened to the numbers when they came to the IEBC. And the electoral observers, the election observers, they had no way of knowing what happened to the numbers there. Only the IEBC knows. So NASA, they have a case, whether it will be proven to be true or it's just, a fig of their imagination, that we'll find out through this process.
One issue that has come up about the issues of democracy in Africa is the continuous amendment of the Constitution to remove term limits, to allow some of these long-term presidents to stay there in perpetuity. Eddie, in Rwanda, millions of people came out saying that we want President Paul Kagame to stay. The Constitution had to be amended for him to stay because he has been a good leader. He has transformed the economy. Economic miracle, as they said. He has been protecting life and property because they were, of the 1994 genocide and all that. How are people seeing this in Rwanda? Because some people are saying that, well, he's so powerful, he just wants to stay there forever.
Well, if 5 years ago, if you had spoken to any political analyst, would have told you that 2017 was going to be a year to watch when it comes to Rwanda elections, until probably 2 years ago when the talk of changing the constitution started. But again, when you talk to people, some of them feel that it's right for the current government or for the current president to continue because of what you just say, that he has transformed the country. When you go to Kigali, it's considered one of the most cleanest cities in Africa. So the people themselves, I don't know whether it's, I won't call it fear or what, but seem to like him. I covered some of the campaigns, and people were coming in thousands. So I asked one of the member of the ruling party, because there was this report from the Human Rights Watch that said that the elections was taking place under a climate of fear.
Right.
But you could see thousands of people coming to the campaigns, cheering, dancing, and stuff like that. I don't know what motivates them.
Isn't the case of if you can't beat them, join them?
Absolutely, most likely. So, and again, the fact that there wasn't that robust and powerful opposition to show that they can shake Kagame, that also probably made people comfortable and say, let's go with the man we know.
Well, we'll come to you. Let's take a quick break and we'll be right back. You're tuned into Straight Talk Africa. We'll have more of our discussion in a moment.
Today's youth
are not just the next generation of African leaders, they are today's leaders. And this is the time to invest in them, today, not tomorrow. So let's connect, let's engage with each other on issues that will transform our societies. Innovation, leadership, entrepreneurship, things that you're doing to move the continent forward, to make you the greatest generation that Africa has known. It's Upfront every Wednesday, 17:30 UTC, right here on the Voice of America.
The lyrics could be French,
English,
Portuguese,
Bantu,
Arabic.
It is the beat.
The African beat that counts.
The beat does all the translations.
It cuts across all languages and gives us the understanding that this is the African beat.
It is so distinct
and adhesive.
It binds us together.
African Beat on the Voice of America. For more information, visit our website at www.voanews.com/AfricanBeat.
Welcome back. Today we are talking about the recent elections in Africa. Our guests are Hamza Mwamoyo, Chief of VOA Swahili Division, and Edward Rema, VOA Central Africa Correspondent. Hamza, before we took a short break, we were talking about constitutional term limits being removed from these constitutions. Do you think these local media groups in their respective countries have fought hard against or pushed back against some of these?
Mm-hmm. I think we can talk about the role of the media in general,
right.
Because when we speak of democratic institutions in a country, we're talking about the judiciary, we're talking about the
executive,
the legislature, the judiciary, the media as the fourth estate.
Right.
We guys, what do we do? Now, all these rules and regulations could have been put very well in the Constitution, but who really calls out someone when they go against the Constitution? That's where the media should come in. The media should be able to call out people who are doing the wrong things according to the Constitution, according to the will of the people. But as we all know, in our region, a lot of medias, they lack in that. And for instance, in Kenya, for instance, I always say it was a special time because there was this fear hanging over Kenya about violence. And the media went a long way to make sure that they don't seem to appear to incite violence. So they played the role of social responsibility. And in doing that, they didn't push the envelope too much to call out people who are doing, things that tend to be out of constitution. And that's where the media in many parts of our, places that we cover, that's where we're lacking. We don't have that objectivity or the independence to do so. Perhaps it's a question of economics. A lot of medias in our area, they depend on the government for their bread and butter. Mm-hmm. So I think at some point, the media has to step up and be above the fray, above everybody, above the opposition figures, above the government, and just call it objectively. When something is wrong, they have to call it.
But the government has to create the enabling space for the media to be vibrant. If press freedom is undermined consistently by the government with some of these draconian laws that they have, I think it will pave the way for some of these things to work. Now, you go to a country like Nigeria.
Guess what?
The media is so vibrant.
Yeah,
you go to Ghana, media is so vibrant. One person went to Ghana and Nigeria, and the way the ruling party came under enormous pressure from the media groups in those countries, it was unbelievable. And he came to say, I did not know that West Africa has so much power with the media. I hope that could be replicated in other parts of Africa, but some of these countries is very hard.
I think it all comes back, especially in the eastern part of Africa.
Central Africa,
yeah, it all comes back to what he was talking about, economics. So the issue of capacity and resources is the number one issue that stops most of the media houses, especially in East Africa, to do their job the way they should be doing it. So we're talking of for example, a newspaper that relies on government for advertisements and commercials to run their business. So if you start investigating a senior government official who gives you money to run your newspaper, then you're out of business. So you find that most of these newspapers are compromised because they're not able to be self-reliant, and they're not sustainable when it comes to running media as a business. So that becomes one of the hindrances that stops these media houses from being independent and being the watchdog that they should be.
But you have, in some countries, you have some of these politicians owning these media houses.
The media houses, yeah. And that's also a problem to begin with. A fundamental problem of having politicians owning radio stations, owning newspapers.
And in Kenya, it's so common.
Yeah, you know, and once that happens, then obviously you don't expect that media house to go against the owner. The workers, they're looking for their pay at the end of the month. And, you know, if you go against the owner, that means you're not going to put, you know, bread and butter for your kids at the end of the month. So this is something that the media has to do a self-evaluation and come to terms that we are here as watchdogs, and we are here to watch over everyone objectively. Objectively, and that's one thing.
If the fundamental block of which they exist is compromised. Because if you're going to evaluate yourself and say, okay, I'm going to hold the government accountable because that is part of my duty as enshrined in the Constitution, yet you are funded by these same politicians in government, then your job is compromised from the very beginning. How do you do that effectively and objectively?
And that's how you avoid that. You avoid being owned by politicians. You have to find a way to exist, to survive independently so that you can do your job independently. This is something that at some point it has to come to that. Otherwise, you know, it's going to always be the same thing. We'll do the reporting, you know, write these fine articles and go on air with, you know, all the accolades for the government, for the politicians and all that, thinking that we are really doing a good job. But we're not being the watchdogs that we're supposed to be.
But the good thing is, the good news is that right now, with the era of social media, actually, the traditional media is being challenged by people who go on Twitter, on Facebook, and challenge these reporters. You know, ask them questions. You shouldn't be doing this and this and this and this. Instead, this is how things should be done. People go on social media, they call out politicians, they call out media owners to try to put them back to their line of business.
But how effective has social media been in the discourse of some of these constitutional term limits, calling out media folks who have been compromised, holding the government accountable to some of the alleged shady deals they undertake? You know, how effective have they been?
Well, I would say they haven't been very effective, but they have played a good part, as Eddie says. The social media is very, very effective and very, very valid in terms of the media landscape right now. Of course, there are some weaknesses, and the weaknesses are you know, you get this proliferation of the so-called fake news. Mm-hmm. You know, people can play with it, but it has the social media has been able to push the traditional media to be more objective, to be more professional. But in terms of really, you know, pushing for changes in how the government operates, that hasn't come to pass yet. So maybe we'll see what happens in the future.
Talking about democracy and the political space in Tanzania, recently we had issues of Tundu Lissu, who is a member of parliament, a prominent member of parliament, legal head of Chadema, the biggest opposition party in Tanzania, He is also the chairman of the Tanganyika Law Society. Now, how come he's been arrested left, right, center? Some of them say his constitutional immunity as a member of parliament has been compromised because
been abused.
the government appears, or the police appear to always arrest him and sometimes keep him in there for days without even allowing him to see an attorney.
And that's one of the areas where the Magufuli government is being criticized for undermining democracy and political space in Tanzania. Tundu Lissu, as you say, is a member of parliament. He's a member of the opposition party Chadema and the president of Tanganyika Law Society. But as we speak, he faces several cases in court. He gets picked up, all the time. He was just the last time he was picked up, I think it was this week. He was picked up and stayed in jail for about 48 hours, and then he came out facing more charges. But he is very determined, and of all the politicians in Tanzania, the opposition politicians, he is one person who has put his head out there. And how successful can he be? That's yet to be seen.
The government accused him of conniving with some foreign agents to undermine, for example, the purchase of a plane that was supposed to have come to Tanzania. What happened with that?
Yeah, apparently he receives all this information from his own sources, and he reveals them. In this particular case, he talked about a plane that was bought by the Tanzanian government, but it's being held in Canada because the money hasn't been paid. He made a lot of challenges against the Magufuli's government in terms of how the government is dealing with the mining industry in Tanzania. So he calls out the government a lot. And in many cases, he's right. So the government response is to arrest him, take him to court, to jail, leave him there for a few days, and then arrange a court case which none of those cases have been brought for hearing yet. So he has this unending number of cases in court.
But at one point he was in court defending somebody, and the police went in there,
and he was picked up right after that. Yeah. So that's part of the when people complain about President Magufuli's undermining democracy and social justice. That's one area.
Using excessive
force and misusing the police force to undermine the political space that is supposed to be there.
But some of them, Tundu Lissu had called him, as well as Freeman Bowie, the chairman of the Chadema, the biggest opposition, say, Magufuli has some dictatorial tendencies, doesn't allow criticisms, it doesn't allow free speech, compromise free speech. But let me come to you, Eddie. Do people...
Before you go there,
right.
I was speaking to one of Tanzanian colleagues who came for Kagame's elections, and we were talking about this. And he told me that with the vision that Magufuli has for Tanzania, eradicating poverty, development and stuff like that, that Tanzanians need somebody like that who has some dictatorial tendencies and use of force so that he can streamline and eradicate the poverty, the corruption that is so rampant in Tanzania. I don't know what...
Well, a lot of people would say, not really, because they would rather see social justice and freedom. There's no way you can allow a small dictator. You don't know once he tastes
absolute power.
the absolute power of dictatorial tendencies.
The next thing would be changing the
What is going to
constitution.
be a small dictator would be, a big dictator at some point. So you'd rather have social justice and freedom than having somebody who is fighting corruption, yes, and everybody is supporting him for that, But you also have to allow other democratic institutions to play their part.
Some people are saying that some of these tendencies have undermined the economy of Tanzania, and that Tanzania's economy is not doing as much as it should be doing by improving the living conditions of Tanzanians. Do you share in that assessment?
Well, as an observer, I would say yes and no, and the jury is still out. The Tanzanian economy is slightly growing, really, and I think partly because of the way Magufuli has been fighting corruption. So all this fight against corruption, closing the loopholes for corruption, has kind of stabilized the economy, and now the economy has begun to grow. But how far will that go is yet to be seen because of all these movements about with the mining companies, for instance. Magufuli is an inward president. He looks
Tanzania
into
first.
Tanzania first. Yes.
Okay.
He has been to, I think, 4 countries in 2 years since he came to power: Rwanda, Kenya, Uganda, and he went to Ethiopia, I think, early this year for the African Union Summit. So he does all these things fighting for the people, and people appreciate it. But then when it comes to political space, that's where the criticism comes in.
We'll be right back. A reminder that you are tuned into Straight Talk Africa. We'll continue our discussion in a moment.
Voice of America. 1,500 hours
of news and information.
Educational and cultural programming to more than 134 million people
worldwide each week.
Listen to us on radio.
Watch us on television.
Follow us on Facebook or Twitter.
And through your mobile device.
VOA.
We're dynamic
and consistent
in bringing you the most reliable information in 43 languages.
Tune in.
Tune in.
If you like today's show, please write and tell us what you think or give us some suggestions. Be sure to tell us what station you're tuned into. Our address, Straight Talk Africa, Voice of America, 330 Independence Avenue Southwest, Washington, D.C. 20237 USA. Or send us an email at africatv@voanews.com. Log on to our website at voaafrica.com. Or post your comments on Facebook. Keywords Straight Talk Africa.
Welcome back. Eddie, let me come to you. Diane Rwigara, who wanted to stand as a presidential candidate, of course, she was disqualified. She is quoted as saying that Rwanda is like a pretty girl with a lot of makeup, but the inside is dark and dirty. Is that a reflection on the ground? Because some of his critics, President Kagame's critics, are saying that the political space isn't there. He's narrowed the political space. Either you play to the RPF's rule or you do not come to Rwanda to do anything at all.
Well, this is something we've had from different organizations, human rights organizations, political parties, most of them operating outside of Rwanda. We've had even other political parties within Rwanda, including Green Party, complaining about political space. In fact, during the campaigns, we had issues where some of these candidates could go to campaign and they would be refused or sabotaged by local leaders. But again, afterwards, those local leaders were sanctioned. Some of them were actually arrested because they were sabotaging political opponents. This is an issue that is, I mean, everybody's talking about it. But again, when you speak to government officials or members of the ruling party, even President Paul Kagame himself, he has said that he's not responsible of creating the opposition. It's the opposition that needs to come out and fight for those rights. So for him, it's not his job. That's what he says.
Well, some people were saying that during the elections, not a single hotel would allow any opposition party to have a news conference there. That is why Diane said she has to hold a news conference at her house because none of the hotels will allow her to have a press conference.
Well, it's possible. I didn't speak to any of the hotel owners, and I cannot speak on their behalf. But it's possible. Some of the hotels might just decide because probably the owner is,
or connected to the government?
Probably connected to the government, or they find it risky for them to host her or any other political opponent. But I haven't spoken to any of them to really hear about that.
Hamza, let me come to you. Swahili goes to DRC. You have a large following there. Yeah. It appears the elections will not be held this year. Kabila's term has expired. He remains there. He said he made no promises after, signing an agreement with the Rassemblement. What are you hearing on the ground?
Well, what we're hearing on the ground, there is not going to be elections this year. And that happens, President Kabila's government has become so good in terms of moving the goalposts. At some point they would say, okay, we are going to do the elections in December 17. But then all of a sudden there's no money. All of a sudden the registration of the electoral books is not complete. We cannot do elections because of the insecurities in the Kasai province. So they come up with all these kind of excuses.
But they were aware elections were going to be held during those periods. They were aware that in 4 years' time there will be elections. And they were aware that logistical challenges existed. Now, those same conditions existed before the re-election of President Kabila. What changed?
Well, nothing has changed. It's just that they're using the same excuses.
It's a delaying tactic.
Yeah, Congo is a big country.
Right.
And when you talk about logistics, some people will understand you because it's hard to get from one place to another in Congo. So that always comes up, up there first in some of their excuses. But then they are able to put in all these other factors. So as we speak right now, everybody thinks there won't be elections in this year. And the government has actually said that.
The government said there's no money. However, the opposition and critics are saying that recent news suggests that President Kabila or somebody related to him or connected to him is paying a DC lobbying firm several millions of dollars for public relations work. So if there is no money, where did the money come from to pay these lobbying firms to supposedly make him look good in the international community?
So what they're trying to do right now is to take the international pressure away from them. And that's why they're spending all that money on the lobbying in the Western nations. They want to give themselves some time without any international pressure so that they can go on with this administration and perhaps maybe arrange an election sometime next year.
Isn't his continued stay a violation of the Constitution in the first place because his term has expired?
Peter, you don't get any argument from anybody in Congo except maybe for the Kabila administration. They know that, they understand that, but they have these excuses, and that's what they use to stay in power.
And the other problem is when you look at his popularity, it's under 20%. So he obviously knows that if he was to organize elections today, he would lose. So he's now putting the pressure onto the international community. So telling them, okay, if you want me to hold elections, pay for it. Pay for it. So it's basically an excuse for him to buy time.
Let me ask you about what the observers said about Rwanda's election recently, because some people say that there were not that many international poll observers because they thought President Kagame was going to win anyway, so why observe an election? And he came out with 98.63%, approximately 99%. I mean, unheard of.
That's right. I would say that few weeks before the campaigns, the head of the European Union announced that they were not going to send European Union observers to Rwanda because to them the results were foregone. They knew who was going to win, and he actually said that he would bet his money that Kagame was going to win. So they said instead of sending observers to Rwanda, they were going to send those observers to Kenya because they thought there could be violence in Kenya. Roughly, Rwanda had probably close to 2,000 observers, but 400 of them were Europeans, and the rest were from Rwanda and Africa. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, let me come to you, Hamza.
Yeah.
In Tanzania, the former prime minister seemed to have disappeared. Who is leading Chadema? You could hear Tundu Lissu, you could hear Freeman Mbowe. Where is Edward Lowassa?
He was campaigning for
He was busy in Kenya. Well, he's still there. He's still the head of the opposition, the Chadema. But in terms of everyday activities of the party, Freeman Mbowe and Tundu Lissu is the firebrand of the party. So the status of the opposition, Chadema as an opposition, is still there. They still have the organization, the structures and everything, but they just don't have the political space to operate.
Has the opposition been effective in Tanzania? Because CUF, the third biggest party, is pretty much quiet.
Yeah, well, they're not quiet. They are fighting within themselves.
Okay,
yeah.
Okay.
See, and that's what my second point was. The opposition has been put in such a place that there's no space to operate. You cannot organize rallies, no political movement, activities. And at the same time, you have the CUF, which used to be a very strong opposition party in Tanzania. Now it has within party power struggle between Maalim Seif, I don't even remember what's his position now, but I think he's the Secretary General of CUF, and Ibrahim Lipumba, who used to be the chairman of the party. Now, at some point, Lipumba had dropped out of the party, and then he wanted to come back, and CUF, Maalim Seif said, no, you dropped out of the party, we're not welcoming you. But Lipumba went in anyway and kind of fired Maalim Seif. So they don't recognize each other. The registrar of political parties in Tanzania recognizes the Lipumba faction. So you have these two factions which are fighting within each other, and they don't have time or even the resources or the energy to push opposition agendas against the government.
Isn't that very bad for Tanzania's democracy? Because they need to hold the John Magufuli administration accountable, because apart from Tundu Lissu, who always is on the case of the president, they are pretty much quiet.
It's very bad. It's very bad. It doesn't speak well of the opposition movement in opposition politics in Tanzania, because first of all, there are two parts here. The first one is the deliberate efforts that Magufuli has taken to undermine them, and then the opposition parties themselves getting organized in such a way they can push back. As I said, I mean, Julius Nyerere made this country. Julius Nyerere made Tanzanians feel proud of themselves and feel proud of their democracy. Julius Nyerere would be surprised to find Tanzanians' political space being undermined at this point.
Thank you very much. On that note, I would like to thank today's guests, viewers Mwamunyu Hamza and Edward Rema, for joining us on Straight Talk Africa. Thanks to our affiliate stations and our viewers and listeners. We appreciate you tuning in. For many of our Voice of America radio affiliates, Learning English is coming up next. And tomorrow morning, it's Daybreak Africa with James Batty. For all of us here at VOA, have a great evening.